this morning, we had Trevor. He ran a webinar where he told his story, and then people on the call contributed and discussed and things like this. In today's one, we've invited Bob Ryshke, and he is going to tell his story about how he took these different ideas of vertical development, adult development, and brought them into his organization. So he'll talk for maybe 20 minutes, something like that. Along the way, please put any questions you've got coming up in the chat. And then we're going to give you some breakouts, a chance to talk with each other and share your own knowledge. As I look at the names on here, I know there's plenty of people here who have a lot of leadership development experience. So these sessions are a chance for you to share what you know, learn from each other, and then hear from one particular practitioner and the journey they took. So let me introduce Bob. I met Bob maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I think. He was sort of, at the time, so Bob is the executive director of teaching at Westminster, which is a large school in Atlanta. It's quite a prestigious school. They call it the Harvard of the South, I believe, or it's a place where many people go on to Ivy Leagues, so they've got very high standards there. And they wanted to bring these ideas into their organization. And what I've admired about Bob is just how much he's learned from so many different people in this field. And he's brought the ideas in a very practical and applied way. And he hasn't just sort of relied on external people to do it for him. He's done it internally with his people, and he's had support from outsiders along the way. So he's going to tell his story. Have a listen. The brief I gave to Bob was share plenty of ideas that other people could take and use for themselves, other practitioners like you. Generally, people want something which is quite practical and useful. So I'm going to hand it over to Bob. He can just say a little bit about himself and then tell the Westminster story. So Bob.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for being here. And I'll, as Nick said, I'll try to kind of go through my story or the story of Westminster in about 15, 20 minutes, and then obviously leave a lot of room for us to dialogue and have questions. Hey, Nick, can I share my screen?
Yes. Yep. I will make you co-host.
While we're getting that ready, I would just say a little bit about myself. I've been in education now for let's see, going on about 42 years. And most of my work at the latter stage of my career has been at Westminster, focusing on faculty professional development and leadership development. So let me give you a sense of what we've done here, and would really love to get your feedback and hear also about what works with you. So just to start off with, let me say a little bit about how I'll do this. I'll sort of share our context, our why and our what, and then a little bit about our story, and try to give you some details and some examples of what we've done. And then in the end, how does this align to your context? How could you make something like this work for your situation, or what are you doing in your organization that we could, learn from you and share more about this with you? So why focus on leadership at Westminster, an independent school in Atlanta, Georgia? What we realized coming out of the sort of from 2007 to 2014, the horizon was really calling out for more a stronger leadership culture after coming out of the economic uncertainty of the 2008 economic crisis. And that generated a lot of anxiety in the independent school world in the United States. A lot of schools went under, and schools were really concerned about that in general, and what kind of leadership would we need going forward. While Westminster wasn't really impacted too much by that, we did see that the competition in Atlanta for schools having sort of increased expectations for meeting the diverse needs of students was changing. So we just felt that we had to spend more time thinking about our leadership culture, and not only preparing people internally, but in hiring people moving forward, we needed to have that be front and center. Around 2014, we got a new president of our institution, and one of the things that we did is we kind of built what we called our enterprise strategy, and part of that enterprise strategy was that we aspired to nurture leaders of conscience. And it was a lofty tagline, but what we, I think, uncovered as we evolved this was that a lot of people were confused. What does a leader of conscience mean? Or how do you go about kind of preparing a school community to develop leaders of conscience, particularly students, but certainly the adults in the community as well. And we're a pre-first through 12th grade school of about 2,000 students and about 450 employees, with about an $80 million annual operating budget. So we're a pretty big institution, and it's pretty easy to get lost in it. So we had to get our arms around this idea of a leader of conscience, and what did it really mean, and how were we going to kind of prepare ourselves to deliver on this aspiration. So then the kind of what was, okay, this is all a good thing, but what we really need to do is in a school, hire and support and train and develop our teachers so that they became more agile and more aware of their own development, and the need to think about it, that it wasn't sufficient to just teach the course you teach or teach the grade level you teach, but that everyone's a leader in some capacity. And how do we help develop teachers to become leaders in their classrooms so that they can support the leadership development of their students? I think we realized that at this time, there was a lot of stuff coming out in the education world around neuroscience, social emotional learning. And so more and more dots had to be connected between things like the neuroscience and leadership development, or between the social emotional development of the person and leadership development. There were dots that we had to connect. And to do that, we had to learn a lot more, because I would say many of us on the leadership team weren't really clear about leadership development, other than learning some skills, but not really having an understanding of it from an adult development point of view. So our story was this: back around once our new president came on board, Keith Evans had a relationship with Nick, but prior to introducing us to Nick, we started to really think about strategy. We hadn't really developed a strategy. We would develop a strategic plan, and every 5 years we'd kind of go into that strategic planning process. But what we realized is every year we weren't really guided by a strategy. So we did some work around Michael Porter's concepts of strategy development, and we dug a little deeper into that work so that we had familiarity and kind of a degree of comfort with thinking about developing a school strategy. And we did that work for about a year. And then Nick came on board. And then over a period of about 3 years, we've been working with Nick in a lot of the work that he's done with vertical leadership development. And we pulled in different thought leaders from around the country and the United States to kind of help us think about this idea of leadership development. At the time, Nick had written some of his articles that came out of CCL on vertical development. We devoured those. We did a little work with Reed Deschler on mastering the cube, so that we had a little sense of the importance of alignment of our different activities across the organization. We weren't well aligned as a big organization. We're pretty siloed. So we realized that if we were going to do this work, we had to communicate more clearly across the different parts of our school. And we had to get more alignment and start to understand how the language would be developed and built within the culture of the school. Nick worked with us has worked with us ever since 2016. And he really helped us understand that in order to do this work well, we had to start with our leadership team, and we had to begin the work and understand our own connection to leadership development and our own appreciation for us needing to develop personally so that we could carry this work into our individual teams. So we did a lot of public learning, and we did a lot of coaching and trying to get as vulnerable as we could to realize that we had a lot of gaps to sort through. So in 2017, Nick continued working with us and really helped us see the importance of working with the team and then moving that work out, doing a lot of public learning and taking what we were learning into our individual teams in our different divisions of our school and the different departments. As a result of that work with Nick, he profiled us in his article, Stretching the Culture Bungee, in which he sort of gives a sense of what these 4 organizations that he was working with, what they did to take the learning and push it and move it out to other aspects of the organization. Let me just go back one slide. So after this, one of the other things that we did is we started to see that it was important to build a network mindset, that we had to move outside of our silos and really start to see that within our organization, we were not very well networked. People in our lower school didn't really know people in our upper school, and we weren't sharing the learning as well as we needed to. So we realized that was a gap that needed to be bridged. After about 2 or 3 years of working with Nick, what we started to do is start to design our own program internally, and I'll show you a little bit about what we've done. So just a couple of things to kind of pull in some of Nick's work that became important to us. One was that he talked about this idea of focusing on development and not the content. He certainly shared with us content, but in the end, it was about development and aligning the development to the work we were doing, not separating the two. Development wasn't separate from any of the work that any of us on the leadership team were engaged in. And then creating, as I said, more developmental networks within the organization. And finally, making it understanding that development is a process, not an event. It becomes a journey, and you have to just, kind of get on the train and start moving with the train and going in the direction that it takes you, and taking some time off to reflect, but really seeing it as a process. And then what we did is we used in one of his papers where he talks about really these 3 kind of very important elements of vertical development that to become clearer about how to lead in a complex world, which we certainly felt we were in the midst of, we had to engage as a leadership team in some heat experiences. We had to go out there and test the waters and try on some new things, take on some new challenges, and run some experiments and see how they go, and come back to the leadership team and talk about them and workshop what we're learning from these experiences we're having. Going out there and developing some colliding perspectives with people with different points of view, with the understanding that what we were doing is kind of not just developing skills and building on our skill set, but really building our capacity to understand the complexity of our organization in a different way. And then finally, in our team, really doing a lot of reflection, sharing our vertical goals. We did a lot of goal sharing over the last 4 or 5 years that has really helped us understand what each person is in the midst of doing within their part of the school. The goal sharing has been very instrumental in our work in building a stronger team. So,
Bob,
yeah, go ahead.
A question just came through in the chat, which was from Liz. What's some examples of heat experiences that some of the leaders had? Right.
Yeah. One real heat experience for all of us was really some public learning. So what we would do is we would challenge ourselves based on the things we were learning in our leadership team to go out and do that and take that to our teams and actually do some instruction, do some sharing of Torbert's adult development model, do some sharing of the structure of vertical development and the fabric and the pieces of vertical development in our teams. So public learning was one thing. Learning about the importance of a network and how do we expand our network. So if our network was really closed, how would we open up our network? So going out and our president was pretty good at this, telling us, basically giving us the charge to go out and go across the campus and have informal conversations with people that you don't know, people that you through bringing them into your sphere of learning, you kind of build your influence with those people. So this idea of going out and building a network. So we did a lot of network thinking. Those would just be some examples. And as you'll see, there are some other things we've done as well. One of the things the dean of faculty and myself and I did is we went to Nick and Carl Edwards at Adeption ran when they started their vertical incubator. We went to their vertical incubator and just went out there and did some intense learning about vertical development and really using that workshop as a framework for building a model for what we would take back to our organization and implement. So going to the vertical incubator was a heat experience. Sitting there with 20 other people from Home Depot or from Salesforce or from other large, very large and complex organizations, and sort of challenging ourselves to understand how what we needed to do fit with what they were doing was really not only a heat experience, but in some ways also a colliding perspective. Having conversations with people over the phone would be some of the things I think we were doing. So we built the program, or we designed a prototype for our leadership development program through a canvas that Nick and Carl had us use at the incubator. And our approach was really two things that we wanted to do when we went back to our organization. One, make sure that everything we did was open enrollment, that it wasn't required. We wanted it to be by invitation. We wanted people to be invited in. And we wanted to give them a kind of storefront of opportunities, sort of like, going to, kind of a place like a Costco or whatever kind of big convenience store you have, where you kind of go and you look at different things and you get to pick and choose. We wanted to give people enough opportunities that they could see themselves in this model. So that was kind of our initial approach. what I did to get ready, and so now we're into, say, year 3 and 4. What I did to kind of ready myself is go to the vertical incubator and really kind of invest in that as a professional development opportunity, diving into adult development, reading up on Torbert's model, going to a workshop with Robert Keegan on immunity to change, and thinking about how immunity to change could be brought in as a tool to do some coaching with our faculty. I joined the Vertical Development Task Force through the Gen Network. That's been an extremely helpful experience to just be with thought leaders from around the world who are thinking about vertical development. I went out, a heat experience for me was just going out and gaining empathy with our faculty and staff and having informal conversations with people and trying to find out what their needs were. Taking the GLP and going through a debrief and doing a course through Global Leadership Associates. So these were things I did to ready myself so that within the organization, Nick and Jan Rybeck and others have set us up to really be ready to launch something. But once it's launched, they're not around every day. And so I felt that it was important that someone in our institution be ready to kind of, answer questions, help coach people through some things. So I felt that was really sort of my responsibility. Some of the tools we use, and I'll show you a little bit how we do this, is we use some tools from a lot of Nick's work on vertical development. We've engaged in critical friends group work. We have engaged in some immunity to change work. I do some coaching on immunity to change. In some work that we're doing this year, Jan Rybeck has introduced us to polarities. So we've done some work on some of the polarity work in some of our small groups. So these are some tools we use in the work that we're now doing. As I said, we did a critical friends group process. We're now in our 3rd year of that. Our critical friends groups meet, you can see on the screen, a number of meetings throughout the year. For a certain period of time, we cater lunch. We make it pretty informal. We do give them readings, and we do use some consultancy protocols in the critical friends groups. But we try to let these be driven by the small group. And I do this with the leadership team as well. One other thing we did that set us up for was in 2019-20, we really felt that we needed to share the language of vertical development with people in the organization. And so we developed a leadership development program that came out of our vertical incubator. And we developed 8 modules on leadership development that were aligned to our strategy. And we made them open enrollment. And every month we had 2 gatherings every month with faculty and staff, open enrollment, 1.5 hours. And at each gathering, we had upwards of 60 people come to our gatherings. Lunch was served. We made it as attractive and inviting as possible. And we got really great feedback on these modules from just all kinds of things, from a module on feedback, a module on networking, developing your network, a module on building effective teams. So this was an important way to launch this idea of building a common language. And then this year, what we've done in iterating our we call it a Developing Leaders series. So we're now in 2.0, and we wanted to go from really large scale to small groups. And we now have 40 participants involved in pods of 4, where we partner with Adeption, and we are doing their vertical mindset indicator. All 40 participants took the VMI. And Nick and Jan have done some workshops with us to introduce the VMI, to help do a group debrief of the VMI. And these developmental pods, sort of based on Robert Keegan's everyone culture, where to become a more deliberately developmental organization, you need to get people into small groups working intentionally on their own development. These pods are now we've launched them this semester, and they're kind of coming to a culmination of their work. And in addition to the adeption model that they are invested in, we also made available to them one-on-one coaching. So all 40 of them were able to sign up with one-on-one coaching with Jan Rybeck. And that has really received high marks from all of our people who have had coaching sessions with her. So that's kind of where we are. I mean, we're experimenting, and we're doing a lot of testing, and we're iterating along the way, and we'll probably iterate a little bit more as we go into next year.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so the purpose of that was to give you a little bit of inspiration, a few ideas on what it can look like in practice when individuals bring this into organizations. And so what we'd like to do now is to get you to have a little bit of a discussion with each other. So a couple of questions to you all to reflect on. First is, what did you notice about the approach? What insights did you get about the approach they used? So just take a moment, and you're about to go into some breakouts so you can have a discussion on this. What insights did you get, or what did you notice about the approach which they used? Write some notes to yourself, or just reflect in your own mind. And a second one, as a practitioner, if you're a practitioner, what questions are sort of you holding in your mind about vertical leadership development or leadership development in general? As you think about bringing these ideas into organizations, what are some of the sort of big questions you've got on your mind? Could be challenges you're coming up against, or things you're wondering how to do. All right, and we're going to give you a chance to go into some breakouts and talk with each other a little bit around what you heard, insights which came up for you, or things you're wondering about what Bob said. And then secondly, a discussion around the big questions you've got around bringing this work into organizations, or things you would like to learn more about. You've got a lot of people on this call who have deep experience in this field, who I can recognize. So there'll be a lot for you to learn from each other. So we want to give you a chance to talk and contribute. All right, so we're going to put you into breakouts. What insights did you get so far? Ideas for application, and then what questions are you holding that you'd like to discuss with others? All right, we're going to open up the breakouts. There'll be we'll have you in groups of about 4 or 5 people. When you go in there, please turn on your cameras so you can see each other. Do a quick introduction to each other so you know who's with you. And then we'll go for about 10 minutes. We'll bring you back, and we'll have a large group discussion about bringing these ideas into organizations. All right, the rooms are open now. Okay, hello everyone, welcome back. So I bounced around a few different rooms. Looks like there was plenty of conversation and knowledge sharing going on. What we'll do for the last 10 minutes or so, and we'll finish a little bit early just to give you some space before your next one, is it would be good to hear some of the questions which you are holding about doing this work. So it could be a question related specifically to Bob. It could be a more general one, but I'll just invite you in the chat so that we can see lots of different questions and get a feel for it. And Jeff, yep, feel free to talk if you'd like. But if people just, while you're doing that, if you could just put in the chat, what's a question that you are holding at the moment?
Yeah, one of the questions that came up in our group was, well, if once people have done the assessment or indicator, what comes next? What do we actually do with that information, as opposed to file it away and say, that's really fascinating, but how does that impact me?
Okay.
Yeah, what we did, Jeff, is when people did the VMI, they did their digital debrief with Adeption, and they got some insight into their stage of development. And then they got the group debrief with Nick and Jan. Then what I challenge them to do in their pods is take a challenge, either a personal challenge, a leadership challenge that they're currently in the midst of, and in their pods, workshop that idea of the challenge they're in the midst of, and try to align it to some of the things they learned about themselves through the VMI. And then in their pod, kind of just with their peers, 3 other peers, talk about what could be an experiment I would run, what could be a heat experience I could gain, what could be a colliding perspective I would get in the midst of, to kind of start to unravel the challenge I'm in the midst of, and how could I grow myself out into a new understanding of how to work with that challenge. So that was some work that they're currently in the midst of doing in their pods.
So these pods are people in the same organization at the same level?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're across departments, they're across divisions. They're not necessarily everybody in the same department. They don't necessarily know each other well.
Great. Yeah, that's a very complete answer. Thank you.
Wanda, do you want to share your question? And with these, Bob can he'll give his perspective, but others also might have a perspective on some of these questions. So feel free to answer. But Wanda, your question looked good.
Yeah. So we have had, I guess, feedback, and then we're also looking forward into some more pieces of work where the pods or the coaching circles are a big part of the program. People really value the time to share and talk and work through these big ideas or big changes that they're making as a result of their development. But what I'm wondering is, how do I make sure that we're giving the right ideas to our clients around how to structure these properly, what makes them sustainable and self-sufficient, so they aren't, reliant on a facilitator. So that's kind of what worked well, Robert. I mean, with what you saw in your organization. Going to mute because I've got background.
Yeah, Jan Rybeck did a little work with us on facilitation, not a lot, just a sort of an overview, so that the pods had an understanding of how to share the facilitation of their work. And the other thing we did is we tried to make the experience really inviting. So we offered each pod about $300 or $400 to draw on for things like meals for a pod meeting. We tried to give them some resources so that they could tap into some resources to support their work. And pods met in the morning, they met in the evening, whenever they could arrange time together. It was by invitation, right? So we didn't, the hardest thing for me was letting go of control. So I really don't have any control over the pods. They're self-authoring, self-generating groups of people. So that's been hard for me on my end to not do that. I push out some things every week to them, but most of the time I don't get anything back. So it's a little bit of a mystery. And that's been the hardest thing for me.
Thanks, Bob.
A few people were asking about impact and measures. So could be Bob talking about that one, but it could also be other people as well, if they have approaches they use for impact and measures. But do you want to start on that one, Bob?
That was brought up also in the group I was in. We have most of the measurement we've been doing so far is more informal. A lot of storytelling, and the storytelling is giving us good information that we're on the right track, but we haven't collected a lot of data yet on sort of impact in terms of growth and development. That's kind of down in the horizon a bit. And then outcomes, I think what we're seeing people really being energized by the work, being energized by the conversation, being energized by being in a small informal group with their colleagues. So I think those have been some things that we found have been impactful. And I'm hoping that we're going to see more. We haven't done the kind of full-scale work we need to do to kind of get underneath the hood a little bit.
Let's take one more, and Andrew has got an interesting question there. Andrew?
Thanks, Nick. Thanks so much for sharing, Robert. Wonderful insights in your story. I'm just curious, you mentioned that the pods themselves are self-authoring, but of course, one of the things that this sort of work brings up is that in your organisation, you may have a number of people who are at the socialised stage of development, a number of people who are self-authoring, and some people who are self-transforming. So how did you create a space where they could see the value of each other and not have unhealthy competition, or not have a sense that I'm more evolved than you are, and therefore I'm somehow better?
Bob, you're on mute.
One thing that has helped Andrew with this is a lot of Nick's work, some of his most recent work that he's written about. He I think really does a good job of outlining how adult development is not necessarily hierarchical, that it is more of a range of options that are available to us to draw on. And so that if we're sort of self-authored, we rely on our kind of our more socialized tendencies to work effectively in a group or whatever. So I think that approach of when we create the common language and when we push out the model to the larger audience in our organization, putting it out there like that gives it a safer space in which to talk about where you are and what you're doing and how you're growing. As opposed to I'm here and aren't I better than you? I think that we have really resisted that approach, which I know isn't really how people look at adult development, but it certainly is the way some people interpret some of that. So we've tried to keep away from that as much as we can.
I think one thing I've learned as well is we don't really focus people too much on the stage. They do the BMI or they do whatever assessment they do, they get some results, they learn about these as an individual, and then after that we pretty much focus on development. We don't get them to go into pods and tell each other, which report you got. We don't make that the focus. Our partner Jan, our lead coach, has a great phrase which is hold the stages lightly and take the development seriously. And that's pretty much our approach. Focus on the development, not on the stages too much. And it doesn't seem to come up as an issue. It's a big fear, many of us practitioners have about this, but it doesn't seem to come up because we don't go on about it too much.
And I would, my experience is it doesn't come up with us very much at all. And we've had that approach, right?
Right. Okay. I know what the Zoom world is like. You may have another one you need to go to very soon. So I'd like to give you just a few minutes if you want to go get a coffee or have a bio break or anything like that. So thank you very much for coming along. It was great to see familiar faces and new faces and all of your attention. We'll keep running these about once a quarter. The recordings will be available on LinkedIn. We'll have the other one as well, which was done at the law firm. That will be available. So just keep an eye on my LinkedIn page and we'll get those up for you. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Great to see you.